Welcome to the HR Think Tank, our podcast that uncovers the power a trusted workforce has on team performance, culture, and morale. We gather insights from experts, business leaders, and HR professionals to help you lead your team more effectively. Here's your host, Kai No, CEO of Verify Now, a trusted provider of background screening services.
We're all aware of how important a strong brand is for our business, but how many of us take time to think about and develop our own personal brand? In this episode, we talk about why a personal brand matters and how you go about developing and marketing brand new. Our guest today has extensive brand marketing, CEO and chair experience across business, not-for-profit and education sectors, including the Centre for Social Impact, Legacy, Rotary Foundation, UTS and UNSW. He was the CEO and Managing Director at Stuart Alexander Co for over 20 years and now continues to shape the future of the company as chairman. He's also the author of a wonderful book, Brand New, Brand New. I'm delighted to be speaking to Garry Browne AM, who has been a personal inspiration of mine. Welcome to the show, Garry.
Thank you, Kai, and thank you for having me.
Great to have you on. So, Garry, you're an expert at building brands. You've got a wonderful podcast called The Personal Brand Catalyst and a book that I've got right here with me called Brand New, Brand New. I would love to start off by getting some insights from you around how one goes about building reputation and relevance. So my first question is, why is this important and how has this impacted your life?
Well, I think from your personal perspective, you have to start with the foundations, and that is your values. What you are prepared to accept and what you're prepared to walk away from. Reputation is then built on your behaviours and your values and how they are aligned. Those sort of components help to build your brand. And when you start talking about relevance, relevance is at a moment in time, and it really focuses on who the circles in which you play, of which you are relevant.
And how has reputation and relevance impacted your life? Like, tell me about your journey.
So from my perspective, I've always been cognizant and I've been brought up and taught that your reputation is everything. If you lose that, then what have you got as an individual? And in terms of values and in terms of the way in which I espouse to articulate, values are the basis by which I live. And whether it's in terms of what you say you're going to do, it all aligns with your behaviours as well. And I get back to the point, your values, your behaviours, and those which people perceive you to have are going to be so critically important in terms of building your reputation.
Okay. So this is for someone perhaps starting out in their career and they're starting to think a little bit more about personal brand. It would be great if you could give us some practical tips on how you go about exploring what your personal brand is and then like consciously thinking, how do I build my reputation? So this question is more for those starting out in the world.
So when we talk about starting out in the world, I'm going to make the assumption that probably they've started a job. And I think one of the challenges for younger people is that they adopt the employer's brand that they are working for as part of their own personal brand, when in fact they should be looking to develop their own personal brand from the point of view that you want people to know you for who you are, not who you work for. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have today, because if you lose your job or you leave the job, what is your brand? And so it's very important to understand what is it that you add, the value you add, and what are your values that are going to play an important part in the circles in which you live, work, and play.
Growing up, was personal brand something you had been taught or considered when you were younger? Or is this something that's come later in your career?
So I think personal brand really evolved because of my fear of becoming irrelevant in life. Irrelevant to my boys or my two sons who I wanted to continue to engage with, and in fact, the younger generation, because I saw that as where I could add value. And I only recognise these sort of challenges late in life, or after I came to a point in understanding that I wanted to really do more for young people.
I feel like with the invention or popularity of social media, it's put a real focus on personal brand, whereas perhaps maybe 20 years ago, personal brand's always been around. It's always been important, right? But it hasn't been at the scale that it is today. Like, people are able to magnify and, accelerate their brand quite quickly through association. So I know earlier you said, young people starting in their career, you do associate that with the company that you work with, right? And that's part of how you get known. People use that to leverage their brand. So I guess this question's maybe a little bit different, aimed at a maybe different audience, potentially even those starting out. But what if you've got a bit of a reputation already, but it's not the one that you want? Maybe let's say it's a negative personal reputation. How do you go about repairing this reputation?
So I think there are two sides to that particular question. The one side is that the reputation you think, or that people think you have or don't have, is contained to a certain circle, because the target audience, those who you're trying to attract, it can be good and it can be bad. But let's take the assumption, or take the angle, that it isn't good and you want to make it better. Then you have to really start working on your values and behaviours and recalibrate actually your messaging. What is it that you actually want to be seen to be? What is it that you actually need to repair? So it's actually going back and seeing where you've made some bad judgments and bad decisions, and messaging and putting messages out that are going to help change people's perception. Because the reputation, as I said earlier, is based on the values and behaviours, and the reputation is the perceptions that other people have of you, the perceptible realities. And I talk about that in my book in terms of the Venn diagram, where your behaviours and your values and the perceptible reality, when they intersect, then that is when people treat you as credible, trustworthy and authentic.
Let's talk about repairing a bad reputation, because I think in our earlier conversations you had mentioned a few prominent people that's gone on that journey. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Love to. So I think that if we talk about Tiger Woods as one good example, we go back some years where Tiger Woods was one of the outstanding, in fact still recognised as one of the all-time best golfers in the world. He damaged his reputation in a whole host of areas, mainly in the personal sphere, and I think the media absolutely slashed him badly. He took a break from his career for personal reasons, from a therapeutic perspective, but also he had a bad car accident, and that made things worse for him. And so he was out of the limelight, and I think the sentiment changed from one of maybe light anger at his behaviour to sympathy. And so what we have now in the most recent instance, where the British Open has occurred and Tiger Woods didn't make the cut, there was a lot of sympathy and sadness that it was probably the last time he was going to play in an Open of that nature, because his golfing performance was not up to scratch. But I would suggest to you that his reputation is probably different. It's not necessarily better or worse, but it's different to what it was. And people have probably, the aberrations he had some years ago have probably been parked, not to be really pursued today.
What would have been some of the strategies his team used?
So they would have put messages out very simply that Tiger Woods has taken a break. He's apologised. He's tried to make good on some of the challenges and some of the bad judgments and decisions he made to get to a point that it was neutralised. Some of those really nasty instances were neutralised to the point that he could make a move to come back.
Yeah. So he took some corrective action, took some time.
Acknowledged, took time.
Acknowledged, and then sent out new messages.
Exactly
to help
right.
rebrand.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's good advice. Garry, we're going to move now to transformation of brands, okay? Because you spent a lot of time marketing consumer brands throughout your career. And maybe you can touch on some of those similarities with people brands. So there are some key moments in one's career journey, and this is when you might reevaluate your brand. So something's happened. Maybe there's an opportunity that you either got or you didn't get. So I'd love to get your ideas on, some good approaches to these key moments. One example is, you're a middle manager. You want to go to the next level of management. You want that breakthrough, but you haven't got that reputation. You haven't got a champion on your side. How would you approach this from a personal brand perspective?
It's a really good question because many young people feel stuck. Stuck maybe in the structure, but their own personal brand may be better than what they realise. And I think the important thing is they need to take stock of exactly what their strengths are and what they're capable of, not just because of what their manager says, but what are their skills and what's the opportunity. So it's firstly taking stock of yourself, number one. Number two, if I've got a roadblock, how do I actually try and work around? So the workaround is, who are some of the potential champions of you that you could use within the organisation? And so you might actually go to some indirect superiors and managers and talk to them and seek their guidance and advice of how to improve or progress. Now, why do I say that? They actually don't have or could not necessarily feel as if you're imposing on them. They actually will feel quite chuffed that you're getting their advice. And so from that perspective, you're not undermining your manager by any stretch. You're seeking advice from someone else superior in the organisation who could potentially be one of your champions.
I've certainly heard that advice before. You say that, you're talking about the direct manager and going above, sometimes multiple levels, sometimes even outside of your own organisation. Because I've heard sometimes your direct manager can be your blocker for various reasons. It could be because they feel threatened for their role, or they might not see you in that way because they've boxed you. You're really capable, but you haven't got leadership potential. That's what they might be thinking because they're only seeing you in that one context.
And they feel threatened.
And they feel threatened. A few weeks ago, I actually did a workshop for young international graduates, and I was talking to them about, this personal branding as well, because I knew we were having this conversation. And I was just saying to them that they need to spend some time reflecting on what their brand is, what their values are. But it's also important that they go on different experiences, not just work ones, non-work ones, to challenge themselves and get that clarity around what their values are. Because they were asking me, well, how can I pick volunteering or internship opportunities? And I said, don't just pick the ones that you think will do best on your CV. Do the ones that you're interested in, because that will provide you an opportunity to excel and do things you haven't done before. And through that experience, it might refine your personal brand as well. Because I could see all of them looking at me saying, why am I going to focus on my personal brand? I said, because that's meant to come across not only in your CV, your LinkedIn, but also your interviews. And there was an aha moment from the graduate saying, okay, so if I do this work first, it's going to make the other parts easier.
Absolutely. And that's why I went outside my work environment to spend time in non-for-profit and other areas because I recognised I did not want my identity or my brand to be defined by the job I had. I wanted it to be defined by the person I am. And so your point is absolutely valid, and it brings a diversity to the individual to not only build their own personal brand, to broaden their experience and exposure. Yeah. And that actually will build their reputation in other circles that will help them and strengthen them and build their networks.
It's true.
That will allow them to call on others that could actually in time help them in mentoring, etc.
Also reduces your vulnerability, when you do change jobs, because you as a brand, you've got a strong foundation. So just because you've left one job, or unfortunately if you get fired or made redundant, it's not the end of who you are.
No.
It's just another chapter.
But the other thing you're talking about, which is underlying and underpinning all of this, is building confidence within the individual.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that young people find and struggle, is to build their brand, they need to recognise that it's also building their confidence to take decisions that they wouldn't otherwise take.
Yeah. Well, for me, Garry, I had a turning point in my life. So I was 19 when I first visited Vietnam. So that's where my family's from. I'd never been there. I was born in a refugee camp. And the first time I went there, I just felt at home. There was this connection, and I felt really confident in who I was. And I think from that point onwards is where I was really able to excel in life, because I knew who I was. And I'll never forget going down the streets of Gang Tho, which is where my family's from. Going down the middle of the road, there was these words saying "tự tin," which basically in Vietnamese means believe in yourself. That's why I think it's important people have these experiences beyond just your work experience, because you never know where you're going to get inspiration from. So Garry, for those that are looking to change careers, completely change sectors, right? Say, for example, you're a banker with 10 years experience in a field and you want to move into IT. How would you approach the messaging part in terms of your personal brand so that way you have better chances of getting a job in this new field that you're desiring?
You would recognise that you've probably had some cross-functional responsibility as an individual.
Yeah.
And it's then about trying to understand the new industry or new area that you want to get involved in. And that's not only doing your research, but then once you've undertaken your research, you may consider starting to post articles that in social media that are going to be in that area. You may approach some champions that are in that industry to seek their advice, to get their guidance, and get them to help you to steer your awareness and build your brand in that area as well. So to try and get people to notice that whilst you may have had an experience in one industry, that you are potentially able to move to another.
Yeah, because recruiters and hiring managers often see CVs where people are shifted from one to another, and they don't see that direct relevance.
No,
they see it as a high risk hire. So sometimes people who are really experienced and exceptional get overlooked.
Yeah,
and I think that's a disservice to the individual to not even have the chance. And I think that's why you're saying these signals that you send out well before that time are important, because then as a recruiter, that's what we do. We can look back and say, oh, okay, Garry's been talking about this space for the last 3 years. I don't think this is an overnight sudden interest. I think he's got a genuine interest. And then follow it up if you've got qualifications or if you've attended industry relevant events. That really gives a hiring manager or a recruiter confidence that you've done it, right?
Absolutely.
But if you don't tell anyone, if you don't market yourself,
no one's going to know.
Yeah. So I guess this is the power of social media.
Absolutely.
Today.
But, take the point that no one, if no one moved out of individual industries, then we wouldn't have the growth and the knowledge and understanding migrated to other industry, to be very siloed in society and industry.
True. And what do you think is the role of having a valuable network when it comes to personal branding? And can you talk a little bit more about networking? Because sometimes there's a negative connotation with that.
It is very, I always, me personally, I hated the word networking. People say, oh, you go there because you network. I don't network. Oh, you collect a lot of business cards. I said, I go to these events to meet people because I want to meet people. I want to understand and learn because I get more from other people learning and understanding different industries, ideas, concepts, whatever. And what stems from that is people actually want to learn from you. And if you build up a good network and connections, it's not about a selfish approach. It's the reciprocity of how you mutually can benefit each other.
Yeah.
And you may take the view that you might be able to help somebody in their particular mandate or their job or their personal life or whatever. It'll come back in spades to you.
Yeah.
And so it's this reciprocity of having and broadening a community of, or even an industry network.
Yeah.
But networking, you're right, is very negative. It's really connections.
Yeah. And for me, I take the approach of building meaningful connections.
Yeah.
So I try to have experiences with people. So sometimes I get new connections on LinkedIn, and most times, I'll be honest with you, I don't accept them unless I've had some sort of experience with them. But if they're of interest, I then try to create a really quick, online meeting. So at least we've got a shared experience. Talking about network, I actually met you, I think about 2010, 2011, when I joined the Rotary Club of Sydney.
That's right.
And I don't know if you remember this, but the Rotary Club actually sponsored me to join. So I was working for PCYC at the time.
I remember. Yep.
I was the youngest manager at the oldest club. And I remember the first time I went to this Rotary lunch, I was like, wow, there's a lot of people, a lot of influential people in this room. Because I looked around and, there weren't as many young people as me. I was in my early 20s, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then from there, I'm still talking to people who I met at that time, and I was purely there out of curiosity. But yeah, no regrets on my part. I mean, you and I are still chatting,
Exactly
today.
right.
So
It's quite incredible, really.
yeah. So I highly encourage people to go out and chat and meet others and be curious. I think. But then what about maintaining your network? Because, I think that's where the relevance part of your book comes in, right?
Correct.
How do you maintain that part with your network? Because your network sort of, grows and maybe shrinks at times.
It does. And I think the most important, it comes back to this reciprocity of what can you do for others to keep connected, that they connect with you.
Yeah.
And some people have to work really hard on it to make it happen. Yeah. Others, it happens naturally. And I think a lot more occurs naturally when you are far more focused on humanity as opposed to a dollar.
Yeah, transaction.
And that's where I see a really significant difference. And it becomes very clear with the people I meet, they're either interested in you to actually get to know you, or they're interested in a transaction of you.
Yeah.
And I steer away in many instances from the transactional, and I, like you, in the LinkedIn sphere, I won't connect with someone I don't know.
Whereas I've got people, that I know, they connect anyone. I've had advice saying, Kai, you need to build your personal brand, accept anyone who's willing to follow you. Just accept anyone. I'm like, I don't know. I felt a bit uneasy about it. It wasn't like Instagram for me. So maybe let's talk about social media now. So one of the themes in your podcast is standing out in the crowd the right way. So that makes me think of social media, and I'm wondering if we can just dive in a little bit deeper around how we use social media to project our personal brand. This is, I guess, a bit of crafting, personal branding crafting. What's some good tips around this space?
Well, let's start with some guiding principles and understanding that social media is a great exposure, but it has to be treated with kid gloves, in the sense that your personal brand is your intellectual property. There's a component of privacy, and there's a component of what I would call potential damage to your proprietary brand purely because so many people get out there and look at your personal brand and may not agree with some of the messaging that you put out there and try and damage you. This sort of thing so it's incredibly important that you protect, and what you say and what you do need to be absolutely clear so there is no misinterpretation. That's one.
Okay.
Secondly, be selective with where you're going to put your messaging. Some messaging is not appropriate in some channels of social media.
Yeah. Got any examples for us?
I would not be putting my personal expressions and relationships on LinkedIn. I'd be keeping those to other channels, whether it be Facebook or Instagram as an example.
Yeah.
Too often, and what is certainly the case now, and you've probably seen it, is LinkedIn is becoming too social and less professional. And people look down on that.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to use examples because I don't want to declare people's position, but there was one there a week ago of a CEO who had left the business, and his wife wrote this personal message. And I thought that was just odd. It doesn't sit right. And when you're the recipient of the information, you know pretty quickly it doesn't sit right.
Because some people, I guess they really leverage their personal brand for work purposes. And so, because in other spaces we talk about the authentic self.
Yeah.
And so people are bringing really personal stuff to it. And through that, they're identifying people who agree with them, people who will push them. Because I think you talked about, Nick Kyrgios. We had talked about whether he has a good brand or he doesn't, because he's been in the media a lot.
Yeah.
Can you share some of those insights again? Because I think one of the takeaways I got was, if you've got a good brand with the people that you want to have a good brand with, then you've got a good brand.
So Nick Kyrgios is a really good example, and I think what you saw of Nick Kyrgios, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, was, if I can use the word, a super brat.
Yeah.
In the sense that his behaviours were just unacceptable, unconventional on the tennis court, and people just going, what is this guy all about? They didn't understand. I think that changed to some extent when he had some counselling, and because you would read the messaging that a number of tennis players had tried to help him, to counsel him.
Yeah.
It's gone,
because he's got the talent.
He's got the talent, Hewitt, etc. He does come across as a wild card in many ways. And then when the bushfires, etc., came in Australia or in the East Coast, he was very much there to help. And so all of a sudden people started seeing, this guy actually is not necessarily all about himself, is actually about helping others. And so all of a sudden there was a slight shift there. In the most recent Wimbledon, he showed that he had tempered to some extent, but still very arrogant. In social media, his supporters are a different target market, probably to you and I.
But they love him.
They love him.
Yeah.
And they don't care with the way he goes on. They support it. Yeah. But then you've got so many other audiences that say, I don't want anything to do with him. And the Wimbledon, the lawn tennis, they don't like him at all. But they put up with him.
Yeah. So he's got a polarizing reputation compared to someone like Roger Federer, who's, quite mainstream. And
he is the signature of brand integrity, of alignment, of communication. Everything is just like a Swiss watch. Yeah. He is perfect in every respect, in the way he performs, the way he behaves, the way he aligns with the brands which are aligned to his premium signature position.
Yeah. And you know, he's done it for over 20 years.
Exactly.
So he's very consistent about it. And I think it's because there is that good alignment with his own personal values. He's not, you know, waking up every day going, oh my God, how am I going to, you know, represent these brands or do this job? He's just being him.
Correct. But before he got to where he is today, he had a bit of a rough journey when he first started. But of course, that's all, people wouldn't remember that.
Yeah. So we talked about social media. How much is too much when it comes to, I guess, messaging, promotion, you know, every day, every week? Like what's the right sort of frequency?
I think it depends on the channel you're in, the message you're delivering, and how you're delivering it. And I'm not sure that you can have too much on the basis that some messaging and some communication that needs to get out there can sometimes be seen by others on an irregular basis. Because of the algorithms within social media, it's not necessarily going to, people are not going to, it's not going to be in your face 24/7.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a matter of how you regulate it and how you space it depending on the channel, and I mean the particular type of medium you're using. Yeah.
Okay. And what do you say to people who say, nah, not really a fan of social media. I don't need it. I don't have a LinkedIn profile. Not plan to get out at all. What do you say to those people?
If their intent is to build their brand, then tell me how you're going to do it. How are you going to get the exposure? If you've got some other magic method of being able to get your brand out there, I'd love to hear it. Because today, that is the basis by which you really have a platform to communicate. If you want to go and spend squillions and get an advertising campaign going on billboards, that's another way of doing it. Yeah. But I suggest that not too many of us have that resource to do that.
Unless you've got the luxury of having really strong personal networks already, and you know you don't have to leverage. But that's a very small number of people who would have that luxury.
Absolutely. Or you've got a great PR agency and you've got a great story to tell that you can get yourself on television. Again, it's so limited, and there'd be a handful of people who can do that.
Yeah. So I first met you when you were president of the Sydney Rotary Club, and this is just one of your many leadership experiences. I'm curious to learn more about your volunteering experience and how that has helped you personally and what impact that's had on your career and how you see business.
The motivation for joining the Rotary Club of Sydney, in fact, joining Rotary generally, came because I wanted to try and channel some of my efforts that really stem from my when I was growing up. My parents always instilled the values of helping those less fortunate. That has stayed with me, and I have developed that even further and have taken a very passionate approach to wanting to help those less fortunate and giving back and working with non-for-profits and those who need assistance in a humanitarian sense. Rotary was a really good avenue and basis by which a platform that I could work from. It's allowed me to use my commercial knowledge, my brand building expertise, to help non-for-profits, not in just Rotary, to actually build their capability, to build their volunteering network, to build their funding network. And I get an enormous amount of pleasure out of doing that. What has actually transpired is that you find others who have interest in helping others, and a lot of those people are in business as well. And so I've used that basis to help build the business, but help build up non-for-profits that can help the community, because at the end of the day, it's consumers that support companies for which companies need to support the community. to actually have that strength and build the economy and to build a community. And that's the basis by which I started the Esteem Foundation, which was a foundation based on helping those who were less fortunate. And that was the company foundation that's been focused on that principle.
And in your experience, can you tell apart those who are in it for self-gain versus those who are joining these sorts of organisations to benefit the organisations? Can I tell the difference between those who join for personal gain
as opposed to broader community benefit?
Yeah.
I can, and Rotary filters it very quickly.
Yeah.
I call it the rotten apple syndrome. The apple falls off the tree very quickly when people can't get what they want from the organisation, because to actually get something you actually have to give.
Yeah.
So that can be in the form of your time, investment, volunteering, or to a lesser extent, financial benefit and investment. But it's this passion and the intent. You can see through people who are not there for the right reasons.
And at the same time, I wouldn't discourage people from trying out and volunteering, because you got to find what works for you, what's the good fit.
Absolutely,
right? But I think from being on the other side, being on the not-for-profit side, you can see the real people who want to invest and support your organisation.
Totally.
Last question before we go into the Fast Five. Could you tell me about one of the best leadership experiences you've had from any point across your career?
That's a really challenging question.
Yeah. One of the best, not the best, but one of the best
leadership experiences.
Yeah.
I think we talked about a number previously, but I've got to say that before I give you the example, I just want to express to you that the inspiration and excitement, the adrenaline pump that you get from leading a team and seeing them realise an outcome that you've worked on for years is quite an incredible insight. I led, as you know, as a district governor in Rotary, thousands of people who really were there to deliver projects. But probably the one that comes to mind was putting together a micro financing project with the Rotary Club of Sydney, the Rotary Club of Manila, and the Rotary Club of Singapore, and then driving that initiative to deliver outcomes in the Philippines that saw us help businesses that needed to flourish, families that needed a home, and communities that needed to have an enhancement and support of leadership. And that took a number of years to put together. And the outcome was just enormous, because you then all of a sudden led a project that started to build or rebuild communities that were homeless, that didn't have hope of a future, that then saw themselves in a totally different light because we'd been able to give them a hand up and a handout.
No, I agree with you. I think being part of those experiences where, it's an idea initially, and then through hard work and lots of effort and time, you see that just sprouting and becoming something real. And then years later, you can look back and it's still going. I think that's an amazing leadership experience to witness. So we're going to move now to the Fast Five questions. Thank you so much, Garry, for your time so far. You've been wonderful. Are you ready for this Fast Five?
Am I ready? How much is it like you've got is it like a sprint, is it?
Yeah. It is. Are you ready? Have you warmed up? I think we've sufficiently warmed up. What was your first job and why did you get it?
So I was thinking about this. I was a media distributor. And you say, what is a media distributor? A newspaper boy. And why did I get the job? Because I said to them I would start earlier and I would deliver all papers in advance of expectations of the customer. And I would get it done in a way that it would be faster than if you did it by car, which I did.
Wow.
I kept that job for a couple of years.
Okay, well done. What's something interesting that's not on your CV?
Well, there are probably a number of things, but probably the encapsulating is walking the Simpson Desert, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Elbrus, and I was an international marathon runner.
What have you learned about leadership and working on a team that you would teach your younger self?
A leader is there to lead, not to be loved. And as a leader, you need to be able to express vulnerability.
Can you have both?
Of course.
Provide a highlight from working in a trusted team.
We went on a corporate training program, and there were 10 of my 10 direct reports, and we all had to stand on a pole and just fall off head first. To trust your team to catch you was something I'll never forget.
Wow, that's a good one. I think I might have to give that a try.
It was amazing.
No ropes, just
stand on a plank and just fall backwards.
Okay. What would you like your legacy to be?
I would like to think that the young people that I can help mentor, teach, guide, and inspire are going to be able to do the same as I've done to help people that they come across that need help, support, and that it becomes a trend and a theme that mentoring is a critical part of life, community, and society.
All right, Garry, this is a bonus question because you've done the homework already, but what role do you see for the future that doesn't exist today?
Well, you'd be surprised if I didn't mention to you the digital space is critical. Mm-hmm. Young people and their social media are certainly focused for the future, but the digital reputation that young people don't have at the moment or do have and don't recognise how important it is as far as their own personal brand is concerned. And digital reputation is something that I don't think a lot of people understand, and I don't think we have too many people on this planet who actually spend enough time focusing on how to protect your own digital reputation. Yeah. That role, I think, is something that will come into its own, and someone who can focus on digital reputation as a consultant advisor will be an important role for the future.
That's certainly something that we'll be looking into because, we do digital footprint checks already, and we're seeing an increasing demand for those types of checks from employers before they hire someone. So it's really relevant for us. Garry, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful having you on the show, and your insights. I think many people are going to say, Kai, you're so lucky that you had Garry on the show.
You're too kind. Thank you, Kai. I appreciate it, and I've enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you. Today's guest was Garry Browne AM, chairman of one of Australia's largest privately owned companies, Stuart Alexander Co, and author of The Absolute Last Word in Personal Branding, the brilliant Brand New. We'll provide a link in our show notes if you want to purchase the book. We were treated to fascinating and actionable insights on how we each can build a better personal brand. If you want to keep up with everything Garry is up to, make sure you follow him on LinkedIn.
Thanks for listening to the HR Think Tank with Kai No. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share our podcast with your network. Check out the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode or visit the Verify Now website for more information.